I'd like to introduce Max Wessel, who's going to talk with us about trends in enterprise tech. I have the pleasure of working with Max as his colleague at Sapphire Ventures. He is a leading voice on innovation and business strategy. He maintains a column at the Harvard Business Review. He advises the World Economic Forum, and previously he served as a senior fellow at Harvard's Forum for Growth and Innovation. So as you can tell, Max isn't very smart at all. But I think you'll still enjoy his talk today. So, ladies, gentlemen, Max Wessel.
Thanks, Anis, Rami, Jeff. Certainly a nice introduction and undeserved. Thank all of you for coming to the event. We're really excited to have you here to talk a little bit about the future of IT, the way business is transforming, and frankly, how all of your organizations can take advantage of this. Anis mentioned that I'm a recovering academic. I know Horace said he's not an academic last night in the dinner session. I think of myself as spoiled by academia, a little bit. A lot of what I do at Sapphire is spend time thinking about the technology trends that are transforming various industries, not just IT, but how thinking about things like mill mining and materials are changing based on the introduction of new technologies. And before we got started today on what will certainly be deeper content than I can get into in any specific subject like security or developer operations, what we wanted to give you was a glimpse of something foundational, what we're seeing, some interesting trends, some things that are impacting the enterprise. But I would be remiss if I started a conversation as a recovering academic without saluting Mike Porter. Many of you know Mike Porter. He's the father of modern strategy. Wrote things like The Five Forces, etc. What most of you probably know, though some of you might not, is in the late 80s, he also wrote a seminal piece on IT. You see, Porter thought that IT was going to transform business. On that, he was right. What he believed is that communications underpinned every value chain. Any manager, any CEO needed to be able to reach down to the front lines of operations, collect insight, aggregate that insight, and then make decisions. Before IT existed, we relied on innovations like the DuPont management metrics. You had easy metrics to collect and aggregate across your company, but you still used paper to get information back and forth from the front line. What Porter believed is that IT was going to allow this instantaneous transfer of insight from the edge back, and it was going to make state or national businesses possible global competitors. In a way, Porter was right. Business is truly global today, right? No one has any doubts about that. Each of our businesses competes in all four corners of the globe. Even Sapphire makes investments worldwide. Despite all of the conversations about startups, artisanal services, and kind of competition from new vendors, the fact of the matter is that the biggest companies in the last 10 years have gotten bigger. They've grown their headcount, they've grown their revenue, outpacing inflation, and they're getting more and more of that revenue from international sources. On top of the biggest companies getting bigger, we also see a wild array of international competition from small companies of yesteryear that are now international behemoths. If you just look to China, that much is clear with companies like Xiaomi, Huawei, and Alibaba. But the world isn't exactly like Porter predicted. No one saw the interconnectedness coming that is now on the global scene. Each of your businesses fundamentally has permeable walls. The things that you thought were inside the boundaries of your organization are now shared with other vendors. And IT powers that interconnectedness. That's what we want to talk about today. A few of the trends that are changing how we work with other organizations. Because that's where the opportunity to transform lies. As we said, business will never be the same. Porter was right in that much. If you need to see some examples, you need to turn no further than just a handful of digital enterprises attacking previously physical industries. Amazon is the biggest retailer by market capitalization. Uber is the biggest livery service by number of countries and fleet served. Uber's in 9 times the number of countries as the next biggest public competitor. And Airbnb is the biggest hospitality vendor in the world, 30 times as many locations as Hilton. The internet is what powered that initial change, right? We could get insight from the edge back to the organization. But this most recent transformation, where physical businesses that made things and shipped them to customers, are being attacked, this transformation is being powered by some other things. And at Sapphire, we spend a lot of time thinking about this. It's my belief that 3 of the core tenets of this change are the fact that infrastructure is increasingly flexible, it's increasingly intelligent, and it's increasingly pervasive. Why these 3? Well, again, I go back to my academic roots, right? I can't talk about trends that are important for each of you to recognize without thinking a little bit about disruption. And when I say disruption, I mean the way I learned it. As Professor Christensen at Harvard often says, disruption is about the introduction of a crummier service that has an extendable core technology that allows improvement over time and ultimately displaces a much more complicated, much higher-end competitor. If you think about the PC, it was introduced as a toy for children to learn to do math. I mean, that was the initial use case for the Apple II. No one ever imagined running their corporate financials on a high-end PC, but that, frankly, is what we do today. Flexible infrastructure will allow us to quickly assemble applications with fewer developers and less complexity than ever before. Machine intelligence is going to let us displace humans, costly pieces of our value chain, and provide insight on a continuous basis. And pervasive computing systems are going to extend the level of disruption that we've seen from software through the browser window or PC itself to all sorts of new parts of our value chain. So that's what we want to talk about, those 3 things. And I'll go a little bit more in depth and offer some examples. Seamless integration is what we think drives flexibility. 20 years ago, in order to work with a communications vendor or a shipping vendor, you had to do something like go out, sign a proprietary agreement, and figure out how to customize your workflow such that information you sent to that company would be executed on. You were locked in. You designed your business around working with an AT&T or a FedEx. But that's all changing. Today, with a simple line of code, an API call, you can plug into existing vendors for any number of these services. Take PubNub, for instance, which we'll have Todd join us a little bit later today. To set up an Internet of Things application, it's a line of code that a developer inserts into their application, and immediately 14 global data centers and a global distributed messaging service can be activated. You don't have to talk to a single service person. You don't have to contract. It's all standard. The level of simplicity is enormous, which means the number of people you have to devote to enabling an IoT application is next to nothing. This is far different than dealing with an Akamai. And even people are being plugged into our systems. 34% of the US workforce freelanced last year. And a lot of those freelancers were finding their gigs via a TaskRabbit, a Postmates, or an Uber, all of which have APIs. As CIOs, it's your opportunity to think about where you pull people into your organization regularly and how you can actually eliminate the proprietary nature of the way you do that. Working with your CEOs and chief strategy officers about integrating with an organization like a Postmates or even a Fieldglass to pull people in. This flexible outsourced infrastructure is going to increase utilization because we'll all be sharing these resources. And as we increase utilization, it's going to drive cost and complexity down. So if you're not taking advantage of it now, you can be certain that somebody is and somebody's out to eat your lunch. Math is starting to automate the hard stuff. This is the second thing we want to talk about. Algorithms are doing far more for us than ever before, and anyone who spent any amount of time between Mountain View and here has seen this example of it. Algorithms are doing things from driving us around to providing us with personal financial recommendations like a Wealthfront or Mint is doing, to giving us healthcare recommendations. The Cleveland Clinic and IBM have partnered to demonstrate, actually, that with the right amount of advanced analytics, you can have healthcare recommendations that outperform most doctors. This is going to drive increasingly capable systems, and it's only getting more significant. Why? Because in the 80s and 90s, people talked about AI, but if you look at the data, there actually wasn't a lot of innovation there. And it's more than academic research. Now, with the cost of compute and storage plummeting, we're seeing real commercial uses of this type of technology. It's all available to you at your fingertips. And if you're not using these technologies today, you can be certain that your competitors are, because the number of jobs that are out there posted for statisticians or AI specialists is exploding exponentially. And the growth of potential job seekers seeking out these skill sets is also exploding. Automation is clearly coming. The final thing I want to mention is that we're seeing new ways to compute emerge everywhere. In the 80s, we had PCs. In the 90s, PCs and notebooks. Fast forward 10 years from now, and we're going to have PCs, smartwatches, notebooks, VR, Internet of Things, even driverless cars will be pervasive in some places. The variety of endpoints is increasing at a more rapid rate than we've ever seen before. And with the variety of endpoints increasing, we also see the volume of those endpoints exploding as well. So most of you in this room are familiar with the Cisco IoT estimates. I chose the even more conservative MIT numbers. MIT predicts that 30 billion endpoints, not 50, will exist by 2020, which means your organizations have 30 billion opportunities to integrate with your manufacturing partners, your customers, your sales representatives, and even the rest of your internally focused employees. Now, we all saw what happened in the last 5 years with mobility. Your employees will pull this into your organization whether you want it or not. So as opposed to coming kicking and screaming and having all sorts of security challenges moving forward, it's vital for each of your organizations to think about how you get ahead of these trends. The question that begs is, how does this impact you? Right? This is what we're here to talk about today. How the IT leader can get in front of all of these trends, take advantage, and transform their business. Because now you are a partner to the business leaders. IT is no longer a cost center. We think that this transformation demands new solutions. IT is impacting everything. Software is exploding along with it. I'm certain most of you are familiar with each of these logos. Major open source projects. The thing is, today, it's not a decision between any two of these in absolute. We no longer have a challenge of thinking about which database vendor we will use. It's not a one solution system. It's about your circumstance. It's not a decision between Hadoop or relational databases, between VMs or containers, or between Spark and Flink. Think about the application you're building and what the right needs are for those end users. How fast does it need to be? How responsive? How much real-time information? And you'll choose from an array of these solutions. That means that managing your IT infrastructure is actually going to become more complex. So you need the software and the tools to enable you to do that effectively. And if you don't believe me, I would just point to some actual data. There are tens of millions of dollars of investment in just these projects alone, let alone the proprietary solutions that are incredibly robust as well. And there are tens of thousands of committers and lines of code committed every year. Once you have the right infrastructure in place and the data is stored, it's accessible, I'm certain that you're all familiar with the fact that your employees are demanding more and more insight. Even the oldest, stodgiest industrial business person is trying to be more data-driven. Government workers are trying to be more data-driven, so we know this is coming. Tableau led the way for this. They demonstrated the need for basic visualization. But the way we see it, Tableau is just that, the basic visualization. There are a number of vendors that are trying to figure out how to incorporate new data sources and think about enabling new use cases for business insights. I would suggest that based on your scenario, whether it's an SAP, a Zoom Data, a Looker, et cetera, there are solutions you need to be looking at here. In particular because the data itself is exploding, as we mentioned, and it's from new sources. Companies like Planet Labs are providing geospatial data for use in agricultural or industrial scenarios all over the world. We see time series data streaming off of IoT devices. And if you haven't looked at the volumes of data created via YouTube or captured through Kaltura's pipes, we know that video is a big thing. To crunch the numbers the right way, you need new systems. But once you have the data organized, the interesting thing is that it's easier than ever once it's there to take advantage of it. The chart behind me is open API growth. Open APIs are the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see. Google has an open API for predictive analytics. And the question I would ask each of you is, if Google has an open API for predictive analytics, what do you think they actually make available only to their own developers behind the scenes? It's probably pretty robust. So in order to take advantage of this inside of your organization, you need to think about what are the tools and resources that you need, what are the changes in your development methodology, et cetera, that will allow you to streamline and simplify your development process. But when you do that, when you collect the data, when you organize it, and when you make it accessible, what presents itself is the opportunity for insightful and impactful applications. Big data and workflow will finally converge. There's a lot of this discussion of OLTP and OLAP meeting in the middle. I'm a firm believer that this is coming. Why? Because if you think about a company like Retail Solutions, what they do is they crunch tens of billions of lines of information every morning. And between 12 and 1 a.m., they come up with an amount of insight that can be pushed down to an individual store manager. If you operate a 3,000 store retail chain, you can send an individual store manager recommendations around how to change their trade promotions or pricing on a daily basis. That's a process that happened over weeks or months before, when individual people had to go through Excel files, even with the most highly automated macros, and send requests down to the edges of their organization. Now it happens in minutes. Whether it's retail, security, legislation, HR, or sales, this is coming. And it presents an opportunity for CIOs to be the drivers of change in business process. Again, CIO-CEO collaboration is vital. The other thing is, each of you has an opportunity to concentrate on extraordinary experiences, not just the basics. We talked a little bit about these microservices that are emerging. You get to plug into complex, complicated back-end systems, things that have been wildly streamlined for you, which means that you actually get to focus on doing the things that are most critical for your organization. These back-end utilities that have emerged, whether it's a PubNub, a Twilio, a Stripe, et cetera, make it possible for you to focus on that key workflow, what your employees are demanding. Great companies have illustrated this much, whether it's a TalkDesk or a Venmo. Neither of those companies has anything under the hood. They literally plug into the rails of a PayPal or a Stripe or a Twilio, and they say, all right, we're going to focus on just workflow management. And they've seen wild adoption with actually a core developer base of very little inside of their organization. And inside of each of your organizations, you have the ability to do this for your employees as well. It seems fairly rosy. There's a lot of opportunity, and there is. But there are some thorns that come along with this. It's your responsibility to both empower innovation and also manage risk. And managing risk here is a little bit different. Because in this increasingly networked economy, in this information-driven business, data becomes your new critical asset. There are a number of conversations recently that have started to refer to data as the new oil. Fossil fuels powered the Industrial Revolution. Well, the information revolution is powered by each of these. Whether it's your customer data, IoT streaming data, your financial systems, all of these great new applications that you can build to transform your business process, this is the most critical piece of it. And it's your job as IT leaders to protect this because it's a little different, as I mentioned. When an engineer leaves your organization, their brain, in their body, walks along with them. In that brain, it's pretty reasonable to expect that maybe they have an understanding of your development process, of your business workflows, et cetera. It's also reasonable to expect that that brain probably can't memorize 10 billion lines of information. So unlike before, you have this critical asset that's fairly easy to defend. It's also incredibly scalable, and it's replicable at nearly no cost, which puts the onus on you to defend it from a handful of other players who are a little bit more malevolent in nature. So the last thing I want to talk about, and we'll go far in depth on a panel later today, is the fact that we see with this transformation an increasing need for CIOs to figure out how to defend the edges of their organization and protect this critical asset. The only way to defend it 100% is to cut your connection to the outside world. Literally all the wires, destroy them. Now that is an unreasonable ask because at the end of the day, if you do that and you're left in the Stone Ages, somebody will come eat your lunch in another way. So you have to walk this fine line, but it's pretty important that you do. If you do, if you defend it, if you take advantage of these flexible, intelligent, and pervasive infrastructure opportunities, if you figure out how to change your business process, the opportunity is enormous because these IT-enabled services, the way business is competing now with previously physical vendors, you can scale this globally when it works in a matter of minutes or days. That's the wonder. That's why Airbnb and Uber are bigger than all of their competitors, because it scales really well. And so with that, I maintain that Porter said IT would change everything. He was right, but it still is. And we actually have an article outside Porter's update to this talking about how IoT and digital services are transforming business as it is today and business structures. So we hope you pick that up and read it as well. We're really excited about pushing these ideas with you. This is just the foundation, but we have a series of roundtables and breakout panels today to go much, much deeper into each of these areas.